Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. Welcome back to another die-cast model aircraft review, this time of a 1/200 scale model. Yes, in 1/200 scale comes this, the BAC Aérospatiale Concorde, and it is the first and probably the only 1/200 scale model that I will ever have, because quite simply the form factor is just a little bit too big for me in terms of what I can reasonably store in large numbers. But I could not pass up the opportunity to have a Concorde in 1/200 scale because it is just such a legendary aircraft. Obviously, it's one of my favorites, and I think it's the favorite of many aero aficionados around the world. So the opportunity came up for me to acquire one of these, and I absolutely had to jump on it because it's Concorde, and it's an absolute legend. For those of you who are more interested in learning about the nuts and bolts and technical specifications and history of Concorde, I do strongly recommend that you watch the review I did of a Gemini Jets 1400 Concorde, wherein I get into more of the technical details and the history of this wonderful bird. But today, I just want to take a look at this model for the sake of the model that it is, because it is a somewhat rare piece, and obviously in terms of my collection, it's a very unique piece because it is the only 1/200 that I have, and again, it's the only one that I plan to have as well. So really, we're taking a look at this model today, the different display options, the overall build quality of it, and the details that are herein evident, because it's wonderful. We'll take a look at the box as well, go through some of the differences that exist between a 1/400 and a 1/200, but just generally, we're appreciating this model for what it is today. It's exquisitely crafted. They didn't make all that many of these. Obviously, this is in the older Landor livery that British Airways ran back in the 80s and 90s before they went to their current livery with a more stylized depiction of the Union Jack on the vertical stabilizer. But really, I absolutely love this model, and we're going to take a closer look at it in 1/200 scale from Gemini Jets. Concorde returns to the channel here, 50% bigger. Before we take a closer look at this absolutely tremendous model, we have to take a look at the equally tremendous box in which it comes. And this is going to be a little bit finicky for us to accomplish simply because the box is huge. However, yes, if we can take the giant hand here and move the aircraft off of the turntable, perhaps we can get some prayer of seeing at least some of the box. You can just start to see a little bit of the problem that lies before us, because this is quite an enormous box. Anyway, there it is, the Gemini 200, visible right there in the upper left-hand corner of the box, and we can pick up the camera. There we go. Picking up the whole camera and tripod assembly. That's fun. But there it is. Obviously, this is a 2018 release from Gemini, so you can see 20th anniversary logo there in the upper left of the box. And then across the upper center, British Airways title graphics, quite obviously. And then there is a rendering of the aircraft front and center, obviously with gear retracted. Down toward the bottom right of the box, there is Concorde. Simple as you like. And then 1/200 scale die-cast aircraft model. They do not say die-cast model aircraft, which is an interesting departure from the 1/400s. And then your item number for those of you at home, G2BAW744. So yeah, it's a pretty big box, and we've got our work cut out for us in terms of displaying the entire thing. The bottom panel of the box, there it is, Gemini 200 trademark, and then 1/200 scale die-cast model. Collectible, superior quality, all of that good stuff. Go over to the side panel. This is one of the openable panels on the box, Gemini 200, 1/200 scale die-cast model, another rendering of the aircraft, Concorde, and then a repeat of our item number. Top panel of the box. Basically the same as the bottom panel, but this one gives you the Legalese warnings in terms of the small parts and not suitable for children and all of that stuff. And then our barcode and item number once again reiterated. Their side panel of the box, same as the other one that we looked at. This is the side from which I choose to open it, but both panels obviously openable. And then the back of the box, this is somewhat of a departure from the 1/400s in that we don't have any renderings of the aircraft visible here, but we do have a little bit more information for us. So there it is, Gemini 200. Gemini Jets brings you the highest quality precision die-cast model or die-cast metal airliners and highly collectible limited editions with officially licensed markings. Yes, and then of course you got all of their selling points in terms of the quality and all of that stuff. New aircraft being added monthly. Please contact your dealer for the latest releases or visit our website. Yes, so the Facebook links. And then, of course, the Legalese for British Airways. British Airways is a registered trademark of British Airways, public liability company, and is used under license. Copyright 2018, Gemini Jets, Las Vegas, Nevada, USA. And then the recycle thing, and made in China. So that's all we've got for the outside of the box. The inside of the box, it is a little bit different from a 1-400, mostly because we still do have a look inside tab, not labeled here on the front. But if we do choose to look inside, what we've got to do is initially we pry up pretty substantially because it is velcroed down at these 2 points. There you go. You look inside, flip it forward, there's the void, and then of course there would be a tray in there which contains the aircraft. But there is a write-up that is visible here. However, it is not very readable right now, just simply because of the lighting. It's a little bit different from the 1-400 write-up. I don't know if you'll be able to make that out as I attempt to zoom the camera there with my mouth because 2 hands are occupied here. I'll read it to you. Concorde's history dates back to 1957 when the French government called upon the aircraft makers of Sud Aviation, Dassault, Nord Aviation, and the state airline Air France to develop the world's first supersonic airliner. Not to be outdone by the French, Great Britain had its own supersonic transport in the making, which was designed by British Aircraft Corporation and Hawker Siddeley. Interestingly, the 2 governments merged their accomplishments on November 29, 1962, and came up with a combined Anglo-French project to be named Concorde. The prototype aircraft first rolled out on December 11, 1967, with the first flight occurring on March 2, 1969. Unfortunately, Concorde came at a time when fuel prices soared and the world's economy was taking an extended downturn. During this same time, many carriers had overextended themselves with purchases for wide-bodied airliners. Finally, environmental issues associated with Concorde's noise forced the aircraft from many destinations within the U.S. Regrettably, all of these factors resulted in only 13 sales, 7 units to British Airways and 6 units to Air France. When the first 2 aircraft entered service on January 21, 1976, despite the misfortunes that Concorde encountered in the earlier years, it was still looked upon as the most beautiful airliner ever built. Concorde maintained its position as the flagship of British Airways and Air France until it made its last commercial flight on October 24, 2003. Those of you who watched the 1-400 review will note that that is exactly the same description, right down to the grammatical errors with all of the itses being wrong with the apostrophes there. However, that's the box, and yes, it's a mighty large box if you haven't noticed that by now. But there it is, and I just gotta say, the thickness of this thing, it's pretty substantial. Let's say that is about 8 inches or so. Not quite 8 inches, more like 5.5 to 6. But yeah, it's a thick box, and you'll see why the box is made so thick in a moment. Within the box is their resident, yes, this big styrofoam sarcophagus, which appears to be made of multiple thinner sheets of styrofoam that have since been bonded together and then cut into a square shape. But this is what you get inside. The 1-200s do come with a display stand, so this is what you see there. This is all stamped metal. The pylon is also metal, and of course the peg that can fit into the bottom of the aircraft, you so desire. Just fit it in there with a Phillips-type screw, which is actually a little bit loose. Probably tighten that up a little bit. But there it is, all metal, so not too bad, and it does hold the aircraft pretty sturdily. Thunk. Anyway, the styrofoam sarcophagus, as the little bit of packaging plastic so lazily falls down there, you can see, obviously, the Concorde-shaped void where the aircraft sits. In here, this is where the bag of ancillary components, this little bag here, actually contains the doors for the landing gear if you want to display the aircraft on the stand with gear retracted. So you get replacement doors there, which fit into the underside of the aircraft magnetically. And then obviously you can see the cutout for the stand and for the aircraft. But that's it. It's just lightweight foam that's been bonded together, multiple sheets of it there. But that's why the box is so thick, because they want the aircraft to sort of nestle into the foam. So that's accounting for the thickness there, but not too bad. The other bit of packaging, and obviously I have the landing gear fitted to the aircraft right now, so you get this little plastic bag, and this is the visor that fits onto the nose when the nose is raised, so we'll look at that a little bit later as well. Very small parts, quite obviously, are detachable from this model, so do be careful with them. If you lose them, there are no spares, so good luck. We'll start out taking a look at this thing from one of the more stereotypical angles from which we see Concorde in many press photos, things of that nature. Taking a look at it from starboard forward, and quite evidently you can see the overall proportions of this aircraft. Not a very large one by modern airliner standards, but considering this thing does Mach 2, it's certainly the largest Mach 2 capable aircraft ever built. It had seating for anywhere between 90 and 110 or so passengers. Nominal seating configurations were between 98 and 110, 115, something like that, counting crew members, of course. Concorde required a crew of 3 to operate, at least in terms of flying the aircraft, 2 pilots and then a flight engineer who would be monitoring the engines and hydraulic systems and things, and meanwhile the 2 pilots would quite obviously be flying the aircraft. However, obviously you would have a cabin crew as well, and then of course a complement of 90 some odd passengers. So that comes out to over 100 people. Nominally, that's how Concorde would have been operating. Not much of a cargo capacity on board Concorde. Of course, those passengers would have luggage, but I think the cargo capacity for Concorde was only something around 2.5 tons. So you're not going to be hauling a lot of freight, mail, or other things on a Concorde flight. It would mostly be limited to passenger baggage, and that is about it. However, this was not about long-haul flying. This was about flying from point to point as fast as possible. The nominal cruising speed for this aircraft was Mach 2, so right about 1,350 miles per hour. Yes, ridiculous performance figures are really the Concorde's bread and butter. Is what it was designed to do. And of course, do take a look at the 1/400 review of Concorde that I've done if you want more specifics on Concorde's performance and specifications, because this video, again, is dedicated to just looking at this 1/200 scale model, because it's a rare one and it's a new acquisition for me, and I've got to say it's just spectacular, really. Taking a closer look at the nose section of Concorde now, you can see the nose is in its dropped configuration, and that is the nominal configuration that the nose would be in for ground operations as well as takeoff and landing. And the reason for that being, when the nose was raised, the main cockpit windows would be obscured by the visor section if we raise the nose. And this visor that's in place right now, this is in situ sit permanently on the model here, and that's not removable, but the removable section of visor does come in there so that when the nose is up, the proportion is completed. Now, Concorde also could fly in this configuration you see right here with the nose raised but the visor retracted. That is something that was done in subsonic flight from time to time, but typically when the nose was raised, the visor would also come up and just streamline this very severe angle between the top of the nose and the cockpit windows there. But for takeoff and landing and on the ground, most of the time Concorde's nose would be dropped like that just to give a little bit more visibility forward for the flight crew. Moving rearward, just having this a little bit bigger, basically 50% larger than a 1/400, you can see that we have more detail evident here. Obviously, we have got our one boarding door right here. It's one of the doors that the jetways could come up to, and we can see British Airways title graphics, and then the pinstripe that goes basically the entire length of the fuselage. This is obviously the older Landor livery that British Airways flew from time to time, and I don't believe any aircraft from British Airways are still kitted out in this livery, but this is how we have Concorde here for us, and I've got to say I do like it. It looks a little bit more stately than the contemporary British Airways logo, in my opinion, in terms of the tail graphics. You can see there you've got the and we can see this better in profile view later on, of course, but I just think it looks a little bit more stately, a little bit more subdued, and it just draws your attention to the aircraft itself rather than taking a look at its livery. But there you go. There are our right-hand engines there underneath the wing. You can see the nacelles there rendered nicely, and then, of course, the intakes that would be feeding that onrushing air for the engines. The intakes there on Concorde, they were variable geometry, basically. They were flaps inside the intakes that would deploy automatically to make sure that the charge air coming in would be subsonic by the time the engines picked it up in their initial compressor stages. Supersonic flow does not work very well for a gas turbine engine like these, and they needed that air to slow down so that the density would be sufficient to ignite it once they combined it up with the fuel. And then, of course, when they lit the afterburners on this thing, all bets were off anyway. But very nice details there in the nacelles. The initial fan blades of the outer compressor stage of the engine are visible inside there. We'll have to get a better angle to see them, but they are visible. Very nice. leading edge of the right wing. You can see that overall shape of the wing as we come back forward on the aircraft toward that chine section of wing. We can get the focus to work a little bit better if we zoom out somewhat. There we go. Leading edge of the wing. Very cool. You can see where it comes in and joins up very far forward on the fuselage, and then it just extends all the way rearward. Taking a look across that profile, there you go. You can see the overall proportion of the wing. We've got our green strobe light visible here toward the wing tip. And then additionally, the extreme wing tip there, the most outboard section of the wing, is painted red. So there's your green strobe right there, and then your red wing tip. Very nice, very thin profile, of course, on the trailing edge of the wing, and that's where the only control surfaces on Concorde were, the trailing edges of both wings. Obviously, the empennage lacks a horizontal stabilizer. It's just a very thin and streamlined tail cone, and then the vertical stabilizer with the rudder surface there. So all of Concorde's pitch and roll authority was contained in the trailing edge profile of the wing. So interesting to note there. There's your main landing gear, obviously in place right now. All the tires are rubber, and they all roll as well, unlike the 1400 model that we took a look at a couple of weeks ago. Nose landing gear as well removable, quite obviously, and rubber tires that do roll. So that's all very well and good, and again, so far, just absolutely impressive are the things to see on this model. Obviously, for me, the best feature on this model is the snoot, and it was a droop snoot because the snoot would droop. Yes. So I do like the ability that you do have an articulated nose on this, and it just gives you a couple more display options in terms of what you want it to be. The nose moves easily, as you can see, but it stays in position no matter where it is. Concorde had a couple of different options for the pilots to select in terms of the nose attitude. They could drop it a little bit in terms of being in flight, but going through certain aerodynamic configurations, they could not have the nose completely retracted or extended. It could meet halfway, and then of course it can go all the way down for takeoff and landing. So that's good. It's a pretty tight operation. Obviously, wherever I leave it, it stays in position, going up or down. No problems there, but very nice. I do like that detail. That's really why I wanted this model, to be honest, because it's just a unique sort of feature to have on model aircraft, a movable nose. So I do very much like that. Take more of a profile view of Concorde now from the port side of the aircraft. Pan over toward the nose area, and there you go. You can see a little bit better proportion now of the size of the nose as well as the shut line between the nose and the cockpit area. If we raise the nose, you can see that shut line never really closes. Obviously on the real aircraft, that shut line, that gap visible right here, would be a whole lot less pronounced. But in terms of the scale configuration here in the model, it's necessary if you want this to be an articulated piece. So I definitely understand why they've done that, and it doesn't really detract from the appearance of it all that much, I have to say. Obviously, I've picked probably the worst angle from which to look at this, just to try and highlight that gap for you, but I don't mind it, really. It does its job, and if it allows the nose to move, then so be it, we can deal with it. However, cockpit area, you can see here we have got our left side windows from the cockpit, and we can see this little canard winglet. On the 1400 version, that's just a printed graphic, but here it is an actual piece, a little strake there in metal, put into this slot gap inside the fuselage. So that works very nicely. Also, on the side of the nose, as well as on the side of the cockpit, you can see that we've got a couple of static ports here for your air data measurements, and also we can see that here below that canard winglet as well. Very nice. Moving rearward here, you can see that we have got our L1 door. And then, of course, a reiteration of that pinstripe going all the way rearward on the fuselage, British Airways title graphics. And then, of course, our wing chines coming into the leading edge of the wing. Our overwing exit there. And then panning rearward, more cabin windows. There is our port engine nacelle. And you can see here that we actually do have legible graphics back here. There's Rolls-Royce Snecma Olympus. And yeah, very nice. Got some warning graphics. The little red guy with the slash through him, don't walk in front of the engine when it's running. That won't be a good day. Second overwing exit. and then our trailing surface of the wing with our control surfaces there duly rendered. Very, very nice. Also our registration on the aircraft, Golf Bravo Oscar Alpha Alpha. And then panning rearward, there's our tail wheel, also removable. And then we've got our little tip here on the tail section of the aircraft. This right here is very, very sharp. Just be careful because this will break skin pretty easily, and it'll also cut if you get it from the right angle. So yeah, be careful with that. It's actually quite sharp. And then going up a little bit more toward our vertical stabilizer, there is the coat of arms of the United Kingdom, and then our little nacelles here for containing the armature and hydraulic hardware for actuating the rudder. Very, very nice. No qualms with any of that. I do very much like all of that. Over the top section of the fuselage, you can see that we have got an antenna here. Obviously, it's not going to be a SATCOM antenna in terms of internet connectivity, but you've got an antenna here probably for transmitting the aircraft's transponder signal, radio antenna as well most likely, and obviously it's very aerodynamically sculpted because this antenna has to deal with Mach 2 airflow. Very, very nicely done, and again, basically everything on this model is very, very nicely done. Also, we've got a belly antenna right down there in that section underneath the aircraft, so all that's well and good. And again, really, it's just very, very nice to see Concorde rendered 50% bigger than in the 1/400 scale. It's just opens your eyes up to so many more details that are evident on this thing. Taking a look from the rear, we're actually quite close in. The rear of the aircraft is right there, so we're quite close, but the very small cross-section of that rear tail cone kind of creates an optical illusion of us being farther away than we really are. My camera's lens is probably only about 4 inches behind, so we're very close in. But you can see the tail wheel assembly there, very nice. And then the undercarriage on this aircraft. Obviously, the very high landing gear is there mostly to allow the aircraft to have sufficient clearance for a very high angle of attack on takeoff and landing, and particularly on landing. And that's also why the tail wheel is there to ward off tail strikes. But underneath the aircraft, we can see the profile there, the belly section with the little, I suppose you can call it a step plane area underneath the fuselage, probably for added reinforcement at the wing root there where the wings join up. Very nice. And then the tail section of the engine assemblies. Now, this model also has operable thrust reversers, meaning that these thrust reverser cups, they articulate and they can both close off the engine exhaust. And if I very, 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 very carefully articulate the upper one here, you can see that it can shut down the rear side of the engine. However, the box warns you, do not operate these with your fingers because they will fall off. And I have already had them fall off, and I've already spent an hour putting them back on, which means that get them in a position that you want and then never touch them again. It's a cool feature. It's a cool thing for them to attempt to do, and I appreciate the effort, but it doesn't work. So Gemini Jets or anyone else who makes 1/200s, if you're going to make parts that are designed to be user operable, make them robust enough, because these will fall off quite literally if you blow on them too hard. So just don't touch them. Just don't. It's not worth the trouble. The thrust reverser buckets are all in plastic, which is a saving grace because they are somewhat flexible, meaning that when they do come off, you can compress them, usually with a little pair of tweezers, and then you can get the little nubs to fit into the little holes on either side of the exhaust side of the engines. But it's a very finicky thing, and again, it took me about an hour to put all 8 of these thrust reverser buckets back in place. So just don't do it. You'll save yourself a lot of trouble, and you'll save yourself the risk of causing permanent damage to the model, and that's certainly not something you would want to have happen, so just don't touch them. Anyway, everything else on this model is very nicely done. You can see the trailing edge of the wing here and all of the control surfaces, quite evident in terms of the shut lines anyway. There are no posable control surfaces here, but you can see the shut lines on the trailing edge of the wing. If the focus will stop going ballistic, there we go, mostly. So shut lines here on the trailing edge of the wings. These are for the elevons, so roll and pitch authority contained herein. Very nice. And then obviously doubling of that in mirror profile on the other side of the aircraft. You can also see the nice trailing edge profile of the wing laterally, how the wing tips droop down relative to the wing root on the fuselage side. So very nice. Also here on the vertical stabilizer, you can see the two blisters here for the hardware to actuate the rudder. So an upper one on the starboard side and a lower one on the port side, but very nice. And obviously you'd have rudder deflection port and starboard. Not articulated on the model, but obviously that's what it would do. Very, very nice. The vertical stabilizer done in metal, wings done in metal, fuselage done in metal. Basically every part on this aircraft, aside from the thrust reversers and the exhaust side of the engines, done in metal. And the landing gear, of course, are plastic and rubber, but really it looks absolutely wonderful, and I've got no complaints herein. Taking a look from the nose here of Concorde, obviously with the nose in its extended configuration now, coming down a little bit. There it is. Very distinct profile, quite obviously, with the nose there in its dropped position. And then we bring it up, and then there's the nose in the raised position, and then our focus goes a little bit askew. But, yep, there it is. There's your cockpit windows, and obviously the visor retracted. We haven't put the other ancillary deployed visor up yet, but there it is. Take a look with our depth of focus toward the engines, and if it will cooperate, perhaps we will try it on the other engine nacelle back there. Is it a little bit better? Maybe it's a little bit better. I'm not 100% sure. But there it is. You can see inside the engine nacelles there that we do have the initial compressor stage of the engine visible. I don't know if the compressor blades actually rotate. I don't think they do, but regardless, I can't get anything that is long enough or thin enough inside there to attempt to rotate them. But I know that on other 1/200 scale models, those compressor blades would rotate, but I don't believe they do on this one, simply because they're just tucked away and they're pretty small nonetheless. But they are visible in there, and you can even see them visible there on the port side engines as well. So that's very nice, and again, very cool detail that you can see on this model versus the 1/400. The 1/400 is simply too small to think about rendering any of that. So very nice to see that on this one, and again, very, very good. And there it is. Nose is dropped again, and then the camera will focus on the nose again. Yep. Cool. Definitely like all of that tremendously. Now, if you'll excuse the lighting for a moment, we've got to put the visor up on the nose here. Here is the visor. It is just a plastic piece here with the window glazing visible, and it's very, very tiny, as you can imagine, but it does fit over the nose here in its raised configuration. So we bring the nose up, and then very, very carefully, if our focus will cooperate, yes, you just sort of bring it in there, and there are two minuscule little pegs that fit in underneath the window glazing there. And there you go. So there is Concorde with the nose raised and the visor in place. And now that proportion looks better in terms of looking more realistic and more correct with regard to what Concorde would have looked like with the nose raised. And now that looks much more reminiscent of the 1/400 model, which of course has its nose fixed in the raised configuration. So there it is with the visor up. And you can see there, if we are able just to move the camera itself a little bit more, there's the proportion looking rearward with that nose raised, and it just looks a little bit better, and again a little bit more realistic in terms of what it should be with the nose up. But very nice, and it fits well. It is, again, it's just a little bit finicky in terms of getting it into position, and of course there's nothing that it actually sits on in terms of pegs going into holes or anything like that, but it works well, and once the visor is in position, you don't see the other fixed visor, which is in the retracted configuration. You don't really see it anymore. Obviously it is still there, but you don't really see it. You can lower the nose with the add-on visor in place, but then it just looks pretty silly because the nose would not be lowered with the visor deployed. The visor would retract first, and then the nose would drop So we would never see Concorde in this configuration, but you would almost exclusively see it in this one. And that's quite obviously what you're able to emulate there with that display option. So looks very, very cool. But now, of course, you would never really see Concorde in this configuration on the ground, because the nose would be down and the visor would be retracted. So a little bit of an anachronism in terms of the phases of flight that are able to be displayed with the landing gear attached. But we can solve that problem presently. Right, so how do we convert the aircraft from being in its ground configuration to an in-flight configuration? Well, first of all, we have got to take our nose down and we have got to remove our visor carefully. So there we go. We'll set the visor aside. That's fine. Now, the next thing that we need to do is lift it up and begin to take the landing gear down. Very nice. So the landing gear just stick into the bottom side of the aircraft with magnets, so just pull them and they come off with no problem. The main landing gear, they slot into the center line of the fuselage here underneath a little flange, so you pull them outboard and then down, and then they come out with no problem. So that's good. And now the aircraft has no landing gear. So there you go. Raise the nose so you don't lop it too hard, and then you can place the aircraft down on its belly, the engine nacelles, and the nose in its raised configuration will take the load. And it's fine sitting like that. You're not going to cause damage or anything of that nature just doing this, although it looks rather sad at the moment. Next thing that you can do, and what you should do if you really want authenticity, is your tail wheel. That's also magnetically secure. Just pull it down and that comes off. You can place that aside. And then we have got this. Now, the model also comes with 4 blanking panels. So this is a blanking panel for the main landing gear. You can see that there. There's obviously another one of those. You've got blanking panel here for the nose gear, and then this minuscule one for the tail wheel. So the tail wheel is the smallest one, and most likely the most finicky. I've never actually installed these before, so YouTube first, for me anyway. Orientation on this thing, the magnetic closure is obviously there, and we will match it up with our, there we go. So that is now in place, so that's fine. And then our main gear, let's see, trigonometry, there we go. This is obviously the other configuration on this side, is it? I had problems in math. So, trigonometry, there we go. And this one is going to be here. Almost. They're magnetic, so there are no clasps or anything that you have to articulate manually. You just got to get it close enough in the right orientation. And then it goes in, as you can see. And now the nose gear. This one only goes in one direction at all. So our magnet is on which side? There we go. Got that in place. Which side is that? Alright. So there you go. Nose gear is blanked off. The mains are blanked off there, and then our tail wheel is blanked off. So now Concorde is in flight, which means that now we can get our stand and we can get it here. I have to raise our camera position. There we go. And we have got a hole here on the bottom of the aircraft right there. Quite obviously line it up, and the aircraft sits on top. That's nice. Oh, good. So there you go. You can drop the nose now, and now it looks like Concorde just took off and retracted the gear. So that's all good. And then finally, if you want it really to look like we're about to go supersonic, get your visor back into position, like so. There you go. And then raise the nose. And there you have it. So now that is Concorde displayed in flight. All the doors are up on the landing gear, and the visor is in place and the nose is raised. So now you've got Concorde in flight And again, I really like the look of that. It's a little bit finicky to put together, but as you can see, I did it in real time just then. Took about 3 minutes to do, and I'm explaining things as well. So in practice, you can probably get the whole thing configured in less than 2 minutes, but whatever. It just looks really cool, and again, I like the effect. And I would like it, and I understand why they don't do it, because the 1/400s are just made in larger numbers than the 1/200s, but I would like it if these manufacturers would include stands with at least some of the 1/400s, because it's just a different sort of effect when you've got the thing elevated. It looks like it's, well, in flight, which I suppose the whole point of this is, but looks very, very cool, and again, very pleased with the overall aesthetic with that. It just looks nice, and it's cool to see a tangible object that strongly resembles Concorde just sitting there in front of you, and it almost would make you believe that perhaps these aircraft are still flying, even though obviously they haven't been still flying for 17 years now. Yes. Now we'll go freehand here for a bit, and with the aircraft up on the stand, it does give us the opportunity to take a closer look at some details that normally we won't see on the 1/400s, simply because they're all sitting there on the ground. But here underneath Concorde, first of all, that is a beautiful underside profile, is it not? Yes, but anyway, zooming in, you can see the underside profile of the aircraft, starting with the nose. You can see the canard winglets on the lower surfaces there, below the cockpit windows on the sides. That looks good, as well as the shut line there with the articulating nose structure. That looks good. And then moving aft, there you go. You can see that there is a number of hatches underneath the forward section of the fuselage. I assume that these would be for avionics and hydraulic systems there for the nose actuator mechanisms, and then obviously boxes for computers and things like that. More static ports underneath the cockpit area, and then on this side the R1 door. Looks good. There is your nose gear door in place, quite obviously. Then the underside of the fuselage with our little antennas. The stand obviously sitting there, and then our engine nacelles, the big intakes there for all 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus engines. There is the registration there of the aircraft, Golf Bravo Oscar Alpha Alpha, underneath the left wing, nothing underneath the right wing, and then of course moving aft toward the wing tips, and then the trailing edge profiles of the wings. Very, very nice. Obviously there we go with the engine nacelles again, looks good. And you just might be able to see fan blades starting to peek through there. Very nice. Very, very nice indeed. Also underneath the aircraft, there it is, the Gemini Jets logo. Nice. Your main gear doors, blanking panels in place. Underside of the wing chines. That looks good. Then we start to get up toward the top of the fuselage. Upper surfaces of the wings, we have got some decals here. That says do not walk in this area. That's also evident on the 1/400s, but it's much smaller there. And obviously there, do not walk beyond this line, visible here. Also visible here just forward of the engines. Very nice. Very, very nice indeed. Top side of the fuselage cut here in emergency. That's for fire crews to be able to get to the aircraft and to get extinguishing agent inside the cabin should the aircraft land and then catch fire. And then we have got our little strakes over the top of the mid to aft section of the fuselage. Very, very cool. Not entirely sure what they would have been for. Probably an aerodynamic device, if I had to say anything, but you've got those 2 little strakes. The larger one and the forward one slightly off-center there, but the other one, the rear one, is obviously centered. And then, of course, your leading edge of the vertical stabilizer. Very good. More decals here on the left wing. They say the same thing in terms of do not walk in this area, etc., etc. Very cool. Very, very cool. Definitely am liking all of that immensely. And then, of course, there is that wonderful nose. You can see the fixed visor below the removable visor there. Obviously, that's not what it would look like in reality, because there would only be one visor, but for the model, it serves the purpose, and it looks well enough. Coming across the side. Very, very nice. I definitely do like that look right there. Very cool. And again, immediately you know that you're looking at Concorde. It's a wonderful aircraft. It's so aesthetically pleasing. Even now, 50 years after it first flew, it's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
can't get enough of it. And again, it's just one of the reasons why I had to get this model, even though it's a rare one, and they're expensive. They really are expensive simply because they didn't make a lot of them, and they're just so well done. I can find no fault with it at all other than the thrust reversers. Just don't bother. If you're going to make them that fragile, you may as well not have them because they're not really usable. And if you do want to try and mess with them, be ready to repair them because it's just not easy or really habile, in my opinion. But other than that, I really do like everything that's on this model, and really have no complaints about it. It's wonderfully done. And again, if you can get your hands on one, get your hands on one because they're getting increasingly rare. And I don't know if there are any plans to put a 1-200 Concorde back into production from any manufacturer, let alone Gemini jets. So yes, definitely, if you can find one for a reasonable price, jump on it because it's wonderful quality, and as you can see, it looks absolutely fantastic.
So there it was, the BAC Aérospatiale Concorde, rendered in 1/200 scale by Gemini Jets. And again, I just had to take a look at this one just for the sake of being the model that it is, because again, for me it's unique in the collection in being a 1/200 amidst a whole bunch of 1/400s, but it's also one of the rarer models, and it's starting to move up in value a little bit in terms of going secondhand. Gemini Jets made this one in 2018, and I don't think there are any plans for them to put anything like this back into production for the foreseeable future. So it is what it is, and for what it is, it's a tremendously well done piece. Again, it's all die-cast metal with the exception of the landing gear, the little replacement landing gear doors, as you can see it now with the landing gear retracted, and the in-flight supersonic configuration, as you can see. The visor assembly is also done in plastic, but the nose is die-cast, including the articulating section. The remainder of the fuselage is all die-cast, as are the wings and the vertical stabilizer. The only other plastic component on the model, the antennas, as well as the thrust reverser buckets, which are quite problematic. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Just don't touch them. Get them in a configuration you want, and then just leave them alone, because the repair is very finicky and very high risk, because if you did cause permanent damage, that's it. But for what it is a tremendously well done piece. Definitely it's unique. It's one that was not produced in very large numbers, and it is one that is increasing in its value as well. So if you can come across one secondhand at this point, but for a reasonable price and in good condition, complete and undamaged as this one is, absolutely, it's an acquisition that I think you should strongly consider, especially if you are a Concorde fan, because I've yet to see a better Concorde done in a die-cast format. Obviously, there are build-it-yourself kits available in even larger scales, 1/144s, things like that, but for the most part, this is what you get in terms of the cream of the crop of die-cast 1/200 scale Concords, and Gemini Jets absolutely have not disappointed in that regard. I do hope that you've enjoyed this one. I definitely very much enjoy this model, but I think I'm going to leave the 1/200s alone. This will be the only one that I have, and I'm satisfied with that simply because it is Concorde, one of the coolest civil jets ever made for all time. Until next time, though, I do thank you all very, very much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this one. Ferrari Man 601 saying thanks, and of course, we will see you soon.